Retro Future.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Bonsard of Radio Retro Future and welcome to Lexicon Lounge. Recently I posted a video of my apartment that is in this style you see behind you, and people have asked me things about it ever since. Now I also promised that when we reach the 3,000 subscribers I would also make a DIY video on how I made one of the most visible elements of this apartment, which is the brick wall you see behind me. So for today's video I have made this piece of wall over here, and quite frankly I am pretty darn proud of it, especially as I'll show you. I was not very enthusiastic at the beginning because I made some mistakes. However, what I want you to take away from this video most of all, when I talk to especially younger people, they often complain that either they don't have the right tools, they don't have money for the materials, etc, etc, etc. And what I'll show you today, that those are nothing but excuses not to get started. Because when it comes to steampunk, when people ask me what means steampunk to me, it taught me to learn new skills. It taught me to video edit. I started this YouTube channel. I do voice recording, and also this. This is the result of experiment. I did not know what I was doing when I started out, so I just experimented, and that is what I'll be teaching you today. What do we need for today's project? Safety equipment like this mouth filter. You can take any mouth protection you want, at least a piece of cloth, or do it outside, but still use that cloth because this type of work is dirty, and I'll talk about that a little later when we actually get to work. For the painting, I used a simple primer, really cheap stuff, some really cheap brushes because you'll be throwing it away probably. Primer's dirty stuff, so either if you really want to spend all that time and effort cleaning your brushes, better just take a real cheap one and get rid of it afterward. These are the colors I used. This is a very bright orange. Now, I made a mistake when choosing the colors, but I'll elaborate that later on. And this is a green. I don't really use it that much, but still, I used it as a way of, again, experimentation. We have some cheap spray paint cans. Finally, the most important tool of today is this Proxxon rotary tool with a Dremel bit. This is the bit 430. This is the small one. I started out using this, but I didn't like it. I noticed that a bigger one, in this case the Dremel accessory 407, worked better. Also, this is not a sponsored video, by the way. All the walls panels you see behind me, I did with a Dremel rotary tool. I did not own this Proxxon. I got this brand new because my Dremel over here died while I was working. Dremel, you must understand, is a very popular brand, especially under beginners. However, you gotta realize this is a hobby tool, meaning that it's made for people doing hobbies. This type, this amount of work, yeah, that's not what Dremels are made for. Now, I did it anyway with this Dremel, so when it died while in the production of this video, it is not me speaking ill of this Dremel. As a matter of fact, when you think about it, what I did with it, I did a hell lot of stuff with this thing. This is the Dremel 3000, by the way. However, for the same amount of money, you can get the Proxxon, and all your Dremel accessories work on this. I really like it. It has a far higher rotation rate. It can go to 20 instead of 10, and yeah, that actually is. And I don't know, I liked it better overall. It also maintained its speed way better than the Dremel. It has a lot more torque, as far as I can tell. Now, if you have never used a rotary tool before, why not? It's a wonderful piece of equipment, and it does not need a lot of experience. It's a great way to get a feel for tools in general. Get one if you're serious about making stuff. It's also ideal for working EVA. So yeah, I feel it has a lot more torque, and that's important because if you slow down the rotation of these devices, they tend to break. And I had that with the Dremel 3000, and I did not notice that with the Proxxon. Now, this might be also a newer device. I don't know. But yeah, once working, keep that speed constant and high. So we talked about the tools and the paint. But what about the basic materials? What is this made of? This is MDF. This is what it looks like when you buy it in the store. Well, without all the paint stains, of course. It's just really cheap material. However, it cannot take moisture very well. This is also important when you are painting, which I will elaborate on. But yeah, when you're using this material, I advise you not to use it in places like bathrooms or anything else where there's a lot of moisture, because it will absorb it eventually, and especially if it's not properly sealed. Want to put in a lot of effort. I want to seal it with a proper primer, or there's also proper MDF sealant on the market. Of course, you have to pay more for that. However, it is soft, it's easy to create. However, it also produces a lot of dust. So you also have to use your mouth filter. I used a vacuum cleaner throughout the entire process, so make sure you have a appropriate vacuum cleaner that can actually handle that type of dust. Not all vacuum cleaners can, so everything in this video should be obvious, is done at your own risk. But yeah, that is something you need to know when you're working with this material. Now let's talk about how I got started on this project a couple of years ago. I did not start with these panels. These were actually more of a compromise solution because of the amount of Faux bricks I would need. My first project was this, just brick-sized planks of MDF, and yeah, I'm just gonna show you. So what we see here is my first attempt at making a faux brick wall. We're standing in the hallway of my house, so this is where people come in. What I wanted to do is pretty much experiment with the look. So I started with a small piece of wall, which is this particular build. It's about 1.5 meters by 1.5, something like that. And all these are single made bricks. Basically planks of wood I individually painted and pasted upon a piece of hardboard that's screwed against the wall. So in theory, I have not tried this, I can remove this entire wall in one simple go. I did not cover the whole wall, by the way, just the top 2/3 of it. You know, works smart in that regard. You don't see the bottom part of the wall, so I replaced that with a single plank of wood as a kind of a barrier and something that looks more like big tiles. This is close to 100 handmade bricks. There are 2 different thicknesses. The lower ones are standard hardboard, let's say 4 millimeters, and I think the other one, MDF, are 8. So you kind of get like an uneven effect. And in between the bricks I have used a simple filler paste. You can buy anywhere in various quantities. This one is finer than I wanted, but it does the job. And as you can see on this video right now, you can't really see it all that well to begin with. So that's also something to keep in mind when you're making a large project like this. I mean, this is something that people are meant to see from a distance, not from up close. So keep that in mind, especially when you're working with various contrasting colors. I have used various methods of painting techniques also, again, to experiment, to figure out what I wanted, what look I thought looked great. And it also creates this idea that, especially down here, it looks like the wall has been repaired at some point, or that they were out of bricks. You can make up all kinds of stories in your mind why there is a difference between the bricks. So basically what I did is I made these long strips of MDF or hardboard, cut them up to the size that I wanted, which is the size of bricks. Then what I did, I basically all primered them and made them in the various colors that you see here. Now, one of the benefits of the system, because you're painting each brick, you don't have to paint it all at once. You don't have to paint in bulk per se. I'll elaborate on that a little later on. Good for small surfaces. It's fun on larger surfaces when you are doing this with your family. This is a very good way to learn how to use paint in that regard, and then, you know, create a fake effect, because let's face it, this is kind of like doing a magic trick. Just like with the suspension of disbelief, people want to believe it's real. It's very funny when people see this for the first time, because they really think this is the actual wall of my apartment, which is entirely made of concrete. So this is the first option. Let's have a look at the second option. So I started out with a basic sheet of MDF, and I drew a number of lines. This does not need to be accurate for reasons that will soon become apparent. Next up, I made these 2mm deep slits with a laminate saw. This is a special saw intended to cut through thin plank material, like laminate. Now this is an optional step, you don't need to do this, but it will make it easier to grind. Quite frankly, 1mm is also deep enough. In the past I have used a grinder to do this, but of course there are plenty of other tools you can use instead. And then I simply took my Proxxon rotary tool and started sanding with my sanding bit. I started out with the long lines, then I took one of the brick planks I showed you earlier and used that as a kind of a mold to get an estimate how big the bricks were supposed to be, and again took my rotary tool and started grinding. The biggest challenge here is to make the transition from one sheet of faux bricks to the other look flawless. So when you finished one sheet, make sure you place the new sheet next to that one, use the molds and see where the bricks of the old sheet should end on the new sheet. Getting ahead of myself here, but also make sure you paint a number of sheets at the same time. Now you may have looked at that footage and think, gee, that looks really easy, and it really is. It's really just point and grind. Dealing with the dust is the biggest challenge. The next bit, however, is a little bit more complicated, because this is where the experimental part of the video comes in. At first I started with adding a thick layer of primer. MDF is a very porous material, meaning that it absorbs a lot of moisture. That's why I advise you not to use MDF in places like bathrooms. However, it also absorbs a lot of paint. So I start adding the primer royally. And this is where I made my first oopsie. You see, originally I used a lot of dark brown paint. But I forgot to buy dark paint, so I only had the orange. My second oopsie was I mixed in the orange paint with too much white primer. This wouldn't have been too bad if I had a darker paint. So yeah, what I did instead was I started out with a light orange layer over the primer. Then I mixed in more orange paint afterwards, trying to create more depth. Which ain't too bad, but I wanted to become darker. And this is kind of where the experimental stuff comes in. You see, because I wanted to give it more relief, I took a spray can of cheap red paint. Now because the paint I used was aqua based, it didn't gel with the spray paint, keeping it at the surface, and that's exactly what I wanted. You see, when you start disturbing that layer, it looks like it's breaking or tearing. And if you're careful, you can even create creases. As you can see, as we keep doing this, you start breaking apart the various layers. So the white comes out, the red comes out, the orange comes out, all at the same time, creating a kind of a rough texture. I threw in some MDF dust to create even more. It was okay, but I was not happy. Then I decided, to add some moss color, dark green spray paint. Basically did the same, but I didn't disturb it that much to make it darker. Like it was moldy or there had been a fire, something like that. I would not advise using black paint. You either use really dark green or dark brown. I would stay away from the black paint unless you really want something really specific. However, then I thought, you know what, I have used the dark green, let's try aqua green. This is really an experiment of mine because I just wanted to see what would happen. So I picked the aqua green and sprayed it across all these orange bricks, but also the ones with the red paint. And then all of a sudden I saw something I really liked. It became kind of purplish. So I added more aqua paint. Then I was like, why not do it with the whole thing? Because the orange didn't look all that interesting. So I added more red paint, more aqua paint, and so on until I had the color that I wanted. And then I also disturbed it. And again, you break through all those various layers of paint. So this is a technique you can only do when the paint is still wet. This is very important. If you let the paint dry and try to do the same, you get something very different. The contrasts are gonna be really strong, and if you make a mistake, you cannot correct it anymore. So be aware that this is something you have to finish in one go. That's why I also paint in bulk, so you can get the same effect again. Because if you do this in different light conditions, just some condition might be off and you will not be able to repeat the same effect. So paint as much in bulk as you can, and you can see this very clearly when you look at the bricks of my living room. You can see which of the plates have been painted together in bulk and which were done at a later moment. So be really careful. Well folks, I hope that was a useful video. Now, I want you to realize something, that whenever I start any creative project, be it writing or making a project like this, I always start from a very simple premise. In this case, how do I make a nice looking brick wall? And kind of let the whole thing unfold from there on. I never know what the end result will look like, and this allows you to take a lot of liberties during the whole creative progress, and also to adapt whenever things often don't turn out the way you imagined them, and this is one of those things. Whenever you're creating something, just start and let things come at you as they progress. If you enjoyed this video, your feedback is very important. If you have suggestions, ideas, questions, ask them in the comments, and maybe I can make another video like this, for example, about how I made this wall, or some other project I did, or some other costume prop. And if I don't have the knowledge, I'll try and find someone who can. Now, if you appreciate what we do and want me to take on bigger, more beautiful projects, also consider supporting us on Subscribestar or Patreon. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna bid you adieu. And as always, make things your way. If you like the work you saw, or you don't have time to make such things on your own, I'm interested in trying out some commissions. So if you want me to make panels like these, you can contact us at radiorettrofuture@gmail.com or through Facebook. And be free to use this email for other feedback.